We're delighted to welcome you to this session of the 15th Jaipur Literature Festival, protected by Dettol Banega Swasth India. The session is presented by The Week. It is our pleasure to present today Utopia Avenue, David Mitchell in conversation with Samit Basu. Best-selling author David Mitchell's spectacular new release is a definitive rock and roll novel and a love letter to the greats. Utopia Avenue follows the titular emerging band through the summer of love and a much dark end to the 60s, the collision of the youthful idealism and the jaded reality. Through Soho clubs and draughty venues to the promised land of America and glittering Los Angeles, Mitchell takes the readers through a flamboyant, psychedelic era. In conversation with Samit Basu, he discusses his bewitching novel and the celebration and power of music. David Mitchell is a British-Irish novelist, television writer, and screenwriter. He has been nominated for the Booker Prize 5 times, and his work has appeared in over 30 languages. His latest novel, Utopia Avenue, was published by Sceptre in 2020, and his screenwriting credits include The Matrix Resurrections. Samit Basu. Samit Basu's most recent book, Chosen Spirits, a near-future anti-dystopian Delhi novel, was shortlisted for the JCB Prize for Literature and is out in North America as The City Inside from Tot.com in June 2022. He is the author of several novels, the co-writer, director of a Netflix film, a comics writer, and a children's writer. Please feel free to send in your comments by typing them in the comments section. Do follow our social media handles to get notifications on the upcoming sessions. Please tweet using hashtag Jaipur Literature Festival 2022 and tag @JaipurLitFest. Ladies and gentlemen, Utopia Avenue, David Mitchell in conversation with Samit Basu. Over to you, Samit.
Hello again. It is a great privilege for me to welcome David Mitchell to the Jaipur Literature Festival. I was just babbling on incoherently about this earlier, but I'm going to say it again since we're recording now, which is that when JLF asked me to come and interview the globally celebrated millions of copies selling multiple award-winning David Mitchell, they weren't aware actually that obviously they knew I was going to say yes, but they weren't aware that I've been a super fan of this author since Cloud Atlas, which turned my brain into this kind of reversed Matryoshka doll when I was reading it in my 20s and completely altered my perception of what a novel could do. So it's a huge privilege to be here asking you various questions about your work. And
I must say thank you so much for saying that, Samit, and to hear that from a reader is a great honor. To hear it from a reader who is also a fellow writer is an even greater honor. So thank you so much for your graciousness.
Well, you're really more than most welcome. So a slightly convoluted beginning to how I want to lead into my first question, which is that among our many cultural fables here is one of 6 wise men who come to the Emperor Akbar's court, and through for some need, which I have now forgotten because it was many years ago, they are each blindfolded and asked to describe an elephant based on touching a particular part of that elephant's anatomy. And this, in a sense, is, since Cloud Atlas, when I've read your books one after the other, I always read them as complicated standalone works. While when I'm reading them, sometimes people from other books will pop in. Sometimes I have this sense of the books engaging with one another and with the form of the novel itself in ways that I can kind of guess about, but often find difficult to describe. So in Utopia Avenue, the book that we're here to discuss today, which I'm guessing that a lot of people who will be watching this have read it already because it's been out for a while. But assuming that there are a fair number of people who haven't, at the primary level, Utopia Avenue is the story of a band which comes together in Soho at the end of the 60s, in the summer of love. And the book is structured around their 3 albums. And the narrative follows the points of views of mostly the 3 people in the band who are songwriters, and the chapters are mostly divided into the stories that led to the coming together of the songs in these albums. So when I was reading this, and I have many questions about it, to start off, I wanted to ask you, the genesis question: what led you to this particular part of the elephant? What were the things you were looking to do going in, and what were the things that led you towards the finished version of it?
Well, thank you for that elephantine question. I love music. I've always loved music. It's like so many of us. I can't really imagine life without it. I'm fascinated by it, and we have a relationship with it. And the nature of our relationship with music changes through life from when we're, I think, literally inside our mother's wombs. It is our first art form. We hear the drum and bass of our mother's heartbeats, and probably hear music through the walls of her stomach. And then we're born, we get to kindergarten, we have the kindergarten songs, the nursery rhyme songs, which may vary from culture to culture, but they're usually there in one form or another. Of course, we get older. When you're a teenager, music can be a tribal badge. It can give you a future glimpse of an alternative self, someone you might want to be one day. You get older still, songs, music can help you understand the world, help you make sense of it. You get even older, and when you're my age, when you're in your 50s, songs from 30, 40 years ago, they can be time machines, time capsules of that first morning when you cycled home from the record shop with the vinyl LP in a plastic bag flapping against your knees, and you put it on your parents' stereo and you heard it for the first time. And I can still do this now, and I'm suddenly back, and I'm 13 years old, living in a different country, in a young body with my future ahead of me. And I'm sure there are other variations on this theme of music that are waiting for me in the future as well. I wanted to write a book that would allow me to explore this relationship. It's one thing I wanted to do. I suppose also, just since the invention of YouTube, so many clips and little moments and fragments from the history of music have been uploaded. I was spending so much time not writing novels, just looking at some obscure interview with a lesser known bass guitarist from a Sixties band that was just recorded fortuitously on one day on a rainy March in 1969. That I thought, well, why not actually write a book about music so this can be research rather than some kind of distraction from research. I suppose also I'm an artist with either uppercase A or a lowercase A, I'm not sure. Not a visual artist, but I make my living through the arts. And by writing about one art, you can come to understand other things about the other arts as well. So in one sense, when I'm writing about music, I'm also writing about what I do for a living, which is writing. I'm fascinated in the anatomy of a band, in this thing we call creativity, which is a word that's I can't help but feel a little bit suspicious about, like inspiration. It's sort of on the front of so many books about how to be a millionaire in 1 week, that the word sort of slightly flogged to death for me. But it's a thing, it's real, and it's not the word's fault that it's used so casually in such a plethora of different contexts. I'm interested in it. How do you turn an idea into art? How do you get the idea in the first place? Where do ideas come from? What happens if there's more than one of you doing it on the same thing? This band, what is it? This sort of organism. What were the Beatles? What was that about? Three pretty good songwriters and one damn good drummer. That's not unusual. There's lots of those in the world, but how come those four? What did they have? What was going on there? So Utopia Avenue was at one level, and there's not too many other levels. Don't worry, otherwise we'll never get through. We won't even be getting to question number 2 here, Samit. But at one level, Utopia Avenue was an excuse for me to explore these questions. Also, just at a political level, it's such a fascinating time at the end of the 60s. They come along every so often. This just a historical moment when the future becomes visible, usually just for the space of a few months. A better world, a kinder world, a gentler world. Therefore, paradoxically, a stronger world. Not strength measured by the number of tanks, but by the bonds that exist within a diverse society. These things become visible, and you can glimpse utopia. You never get there, but it's the glimpse that is everything. The glimpse is a sat-nav destination you can sort of put into your society, and with luck aim in that direction. And I think, well, Russia's invading the Ukraine this morning, so I don't know what I think anymore, but I think these glimpses are crucial, and I think that it is demonstrable that societies can glimpse this utopia, even if it all goes off the rails later. At least it's things that make my life so much easier and better than my great-great-great-great-grandparents' life were once utopian, idealistic, whack job visions, principles of gender equality, principles of democracy, principles of national self-determination, environmentalism, the idea that drug addicts might need help rather than criminalization, rather than prison. Just these things that generally exist, at least in our countries, I think we can say, by and large now, and that make life better than it used to be. These were once utopian visions. So it happened at the end of the 60s in the UK, other places as well, of course, but a better world became visible. It was kind of encoded in music, and the world moves on. History moves in different directions, sure, but the music is still there, and it's a light. It's a little lamp. Sometimes it gets stormy and dark, and bombs fall. But art can be this little lamp, and it comes from this place of enlightened ideology. Phew, that got really heavy really quickly. So I'm sorry about that.
Well, I mean, we're recording this on a day where we're kind of transitioning between hoping that the virus goes away safely and doesn't come back in a new form, and also hoping that we don't, that we haven't just entered another world war. So the heaviness is certainly something that I can relate to. And it's really also the kind of thing where I'm grateful that fiction, however strange it is, fundamentally makes sense. And it is also, I mean, I certainly feel, very privileged to have been able to have spent the last few days, rereading something where utopia, even if not attainable, is at least something that you can dream of with the people in the book.
Oh, mate, thank you. That's several writing sessions you've just spent on rereading my books. That's so kind of you. Well, thank you. And it says a lot both for you and for the Jaipur Literary Festival that as an interviewer you've bothered to do that. I'm really grateful.
No, I mean, look, thank you first of all, but I would have read it anyway because that's what I do with your books, and which is a nice segue to my next question for you, really, which is that. So in Utopia Avenue, each of the central characters has their own individual stories, especially Jacob, whose story is kind of in, a lot of it is in different realities really from the others. But even, when the band comes together, I found myself, the moment that a framework for a novel is set, I think it's automatic for readers to develop certain expectations even within that standalone sort of story. So, but I found, not to my surprise, but to my delight, that even the expectations I immediately formed about, what is the story of this band in the late 60s, going to be as they encounter fame and are changed by it as they drive towards success and fail and succeed and fail at the same time. What I found extraordinary about it was that the expectations I had were immediately removed, because I found myself rooting very strongly for the band to to succeed, not just because that's what you do when you're reading the book, but because the members of the band, the primary characters, they display so much empathy for one another, more than I'd expect, and a lot of the problems that I'd expected them to have, they didn't have. A lot of their central crises within the book were about people who were outside the band, even though these people were very close to them in their lives. And especially when it comes to how the manager sees the band, when it comes to how the rest of the band treats Elf Holloway, there is an almost utopian, dare I say, kind of family unit forming there, and empathy forming there. And I want to know a bit about the process that led you to that, because it can't have been how you started.
Sure, thank you. I can tell from the way you asked the question that you also have come across a situation where you're writing a book that exists within a genre, and a genre exists because of our old friend Clich. This is what makes one genre distinct to another. The bones of it are Clich. And Clich traditionally and accurately is an enemy. However, that doesn't mean it isn't an enemy that you can't use. And you can use Clich as well. You can invert it. It's great material. Clich sets out a road markers of expectation. Okay, I'm in a rock and roll novel, so they're going to be arguing a lot, because that's what bands do. They're going to be ripped off by their venal wolf of a manager, because that's what managers are. There's going to be two alpha males in the band who are going to seek to have control of it. That's what usually happens in bands and band narratives. What else? There'll be drug abuse issues. That happens in band novels, both fiction and non-fiction. So the danger is when you start reading the book, you think you already know what's going to happen. The joy is, of course, that once an expectation exists, well, hey, you can upend it, you can subvert it. That's the word. And so that's what I did. Have I just answered? I think that might be my answer. The sort of the band itself. I was normally pretty much every band I've ever read about, they meet at school or art college in the UK 60s context. They formed there. They've been friends for a long time, like McCartney and Lennon, and to a lesser extent Harrison were. But most of them, they've grown up together. They had those male, and they're usually male coming of age adventures together. So how can I subvert that? I didn't really want to write about that, but okay, how about a band that's essentially curated, possibly even artificial, curated by a manager who sees his artwork as the band itself, and he decides to get a folk musician and to combine her with a psychedelic Pink Floyd-y astro musician, and let's combine him with a rhythm and blues East End London bass player musician. Let's combine and let's bring in a jazz drummer, and so in a way it's like fantasy football, but with the band. That was a subversion of the traditional narrative, and also, of course, these set unusual conditions upon yourself, and they make challenges. Why would they be in a band in the first place? Why would they want to play together? Which in turn made me wonder, well, kind of, why do they need this band to work? And they all have a different reason. So by going off the beaten track of the band narrative, you head into marshy, thorny, problematic territory. But by finding a path out of that or through that, I think that's originality. That's what originality is. It's the obverse of cliche, but you have to know the cliche to know what the obverse is, and away we go.
And so, I was watching one of your other interviews about Utopia Avenue, and this phrase came up, which really stuck in my mind, which was, you obviously, I think everyone asks you, writing about music is such a difficult thing to do. And then this phrase comes up, this quote, which is writing about music is like dancing about architecture. But when I heard that, it struck me that not dancing about architecture, but dancing around architecture is kind of what I expect from your work in any case, because you're, both kind of subverting the architecture of thematic and idea expectations, but also the structure of, what novels in each of the spaces you're working in can do. So, the manager, for example, who's curating these people into this band that you wouldn't think works, but it's an act of curation that leads to a lot of success and the creation of something unique. The manager also appears in a previous book. And so there was this, there was a lot of overlapping layers of thought, as always happens. And I wanted to know, really, the Mitchellverse is obviously not the right name for what you're doing.
It's fine by me.
But I also read, I think, that you had said that about 3 books later, you're planning to reveal more of the kind of foundation-like scope of this, what I just called an elephant at the beginning of this conversation.
That's okay. It's Mitchell-fant.
Mitchell-fant. So I want to know, how much of this elephant or multiverse do you see?
In the future of it, you mean?
Yeah, in the sense that as you're approaching this from various sides in standalone complex works, and you're building the interconnections, how much of the further construct of it have you already seen? I know it's not quantifiable, but just a sense of how far ahead of it are you?
I see pieces. So I sound like an amateur prophet here. I think I can see a big trunk dangling down. At least I hope it's a trunk. I'm aware that some of my books have loose ends, and it's on purpose. I quite like loose endings, with characters who will be going into the future with grudges or desires that are not followed through in the book, because in the book in which they appear, because the book's not primarily about them or about that, but they still exist for me. And I sort of want a home for loose ends. That should be the title of the novel, The Home for Loose Ends by David Mitchell. So I can see that. It's probably easy just to talk about the thing I'm working on now in a limited way. It's about 17 kind of fairly meaty stories that are interconnected. And I'll write one, and then I've got one. It's about the 11th one along, even though it's sort of it's only about the 3rd one I've written. But there's a big important scene at the end, and I just didn't want to write it. And this is odd. I like writing. Why don't I want to write this? That little voice that sort of, it isn't even a voice, it's a disinclination to write the scene. I used to think it was an aspect of laziness on my part, or sort of reluctance that needed to be overcome by force. No, come on, sit down, write it. But I've started to trust it more recently, and then so I started writing something else. It's actually the first story in the entire kind of constellation, And then I realized that this story is actually the day of the missing scene. So I couldn't finish story number 11 until I write story number 1. Now, is this knowing? I don't think it is knowing, but it's sort of sensing that if you're doing a structurally complex, but not necessarily thematically complex, but if you're doing a structurally complex thing, it's a bit like playing Sudoku or something. You sort of can't get this bit done until this bit is done, or maybe an old Rubik's Cube or something. It's sort of the order of composition is also a code you have to crack. And I'm not such a smart guy. I can't kind of crack it cerebrally. I have to crack it by these little clues, like I'm playing chess.com a lot instead of writing this particular scene. How come? I wasn't playing chess.com a lot before. I am. I think there's a reason why. So I've started to trust this more. I'll go away and do something else. Now, this works sort of for this particular book I'm working on now, but I think it works in a more macro level as well. I don't really know. Not a lot is probably the shortest answer to the question you just asked, Samit. But that simple 3-word, not a lot. I don't know a lot. It kind of houses different kinds of knowing. A fondness for one character over another, a determination to resurrect this character and not this one. An idea that this day, where these two intersect, wasn't just I might have mentioned it 3 books ago, but it's come back to me now, and it was more important than just a casual throwaway scene. It's sort of some Piccadilly circus of plot lines that needs to be properly excavated and rebuilt in the future. So that's a rambly answer, mate, but it's kind of the best I've got.
It's in the movie this will be you with the large hologram around you, picking at pieces and stringing them.
Yeah, it would be Sherlock, right? He'll be moving things around.
So and if that weren't complicated enough, in Utopia Avenue you also have these characters' lives intersecting with the lives of really famous people who were alive and on the scene at the time, and these huge names from the world of music and art who your characters bump into at parties and elevators. And the moment I saw the first few, I was like, okay, I don't think there's going to be a massive Forrest Gump like key moment in anyone's lives here, but these people are going to brilliantly flesh out the texture of the times that this whole book was set in. And I was further and further delighted as all these kind of iconic figures appeared. And I realized that a further complication from this was that I haven't heard the music of everyone in the book, and except that now the ones whose music I haven't heard are David Mitchell characters. So when I hear their songs, it's going to be an extension of your work, which is possibly a consequence that you hadn't anticipated. But also, if I watch, for example, if I rewatch the Get Back documentary, about those Beatles sessions and they're coming together in the roof, I will be convinced that some of the people also on the roof are also out of so,
Great.
Is this sort of whole other layer of meta-ness and intertextuality something that is going to compound into the Mitchell fant, or is it not central to it because you've already got a large enough hologram going on?
This idea of sort of real life artistic territorial annexation was not my intention, really. It's more back to front than that. Simply, the scene was quite small. We think now of the 60s, of this sort of global republic. Actually, it was just a handful of clubs in a handful of cities around the world. Soho, you can walk around the whole of this loose area that isn't really a proper cartographic district in London, but you can walk around what people generally agree Soho is in about in under an hour, and that's walking around it. You can walk across it in maybe 10 minutes. Small number of bars, they drank in the same places, they played on the same TV stations, in the same TV studios, they recorded in the same studios, they used the same drug dealers, they rehearsed in the same rehearsal suites, they shared the same lovers in some cases. It would be odd if they didn't. It would be odd if they didn't meet David Bowie at some point. It would be odd if they went to New York and didn't stay in the Chelsea Hotel because it was cheap and the management were broadly sympathetic. And if they went to the Chelsea Hotel, it would be odd if they didn't bump into Leonard Cohen in the elevator on that day. You do bump into each other. You don't have to generate a Dickens coincidence machine for these cameos to be plausible. So I was thinking of that. I was also sort of slightly insulating myself against characters being too visibly based on real life people by having the real life person meeting them, so it couldn't be them. So for example, Elf is a lot like Sandy Denny from Fairport Convention. So I have a cunning plan, my lord. If she meets Sandy Denny, then she can't be based on Sandy Denny. I mean, it's that sneaky, I'm afraid. I hope I'm not puncturing any illusions here. I suppose also the cameos, the principle. It took me a while to sort of work out how big the cameos should be. If they're that big, then you start writing fictional biography. If they're small, then they're just a little bit of parsley on the edge of an airline meal that's not really there to be eaten. It's there to look green. It's just a decoration. You have to get a sort of Goldilocks just right in the middle kind of size. So I just hit the principle. The cameo characters need to change the direction of the scene, not of the novel, not of the chapter, but they must be significant enough to change the direction of the scene and to say something or to do something, to be there, or for their presence to be substantial enough to alter what the scene then becomes. And once I got that principle sorted, then it was just a matter of not putting too many in, so it started to look like a shopping list.
So wonderful. So, the next thing I wanted to ask you about was something that again I heard you talk about in some of your interviews, and I thought would be very kind of that the Jaipur Literature Festival would really, the people who come to it and who see the panels would really benefit from your views specifically on this subject, which is that so I think from Cloud Atlas onwards, one of the things that I've really enjoyed most about your books is that they are absolutely post-genre or outside genre. And I heard you talk about the compost heap of fundamental influences that you had as a writer from your childhood, and
gotcha.
Yeah, and that it contained things like Earthsea and the Foundation series and Doctor Who and so on. So I think in your journey over the last couple of decades as a writer, I don't know whether you've had to, unfortunately, I don't know whether you've had to, how much you've had to deal with the rigidities of literary hierarchies and definitions and all of that. But I would love for the people who attend JLF specifically to hear your views on what they're worth and
so my views on hierarchies
on genre segregations and
genre.
and
Sure.
how what it means to you and what it doesn't and what you'd like to see more or less of.
Ooh, those are weighty questions. Something for a kind of a hermit-like writer who lives in the west of Ireland. I hope my answer isn't too much of a disappointment, but the truth is I don't really think about it that much, about genre. Of course, I'm interested in it. What can I say about genre? They are both like lines on a map. They're there because people decide they are there, rather than I think because art decides they're there or literature decides they're there. No, it's publishers and bookshops and readers decide they're there. They're useful shorthand. They're useful labels, but they are only labels. They're not the thing that is being labeled, I think. Regarding my own work, I think I think, as for what I said earlier about cliche, I think the same could be said about genre. It's quite useful to know what a novel is, in inverted commas, supposed to be, if it's this type. So you can, so it displays its qualities like an exoskeleton. What it is very visible and it's on the outside. And because it's so visible, that lends itself quite well to doing something a little bit different to it. Maybe if genre were a murkier thing, if we lived in a world without words like fantasy novel, then it might not be so easy to subvert the fantasy novel and to combine it with the political novel into one novel, which I've tried to do once. What else can I say about genre? I'm slightly at a loss because I've never really had to fight. If I have any success, then I was allowed into this swimming pool of success on a very gradual incline. My first novel wasn't optioned for £1 million in the late 90s. It was optioned for peanuts. So it didn't really matter if it sold very much or not. No one was going to lose any money. Same for the second novel. Same for Cloud Atlas. So I was there was never very much at stake kind of in the casino of publishing. My books were not large bets, so I've had a very supportive editor throughout. Carol Welsh at Sceptre, my publisher, who I've been with forever, and have no plans to leave. They basically just leave me alone. Carol offers me advice when I hand in a manuscript, and most of the advice I'm really grateful for and I take. But the advice is never, oh, this is a bit risky, isn't it? I've just sort of been allowed to do what I want in terms of genre, and I haven't had a single battle. I don't have a single scar, and so perhaps I don't have the wisdom that comes from scars regarding genre. How's it been for you?
No, I mean, this was exactly what I was hoping your answer would be. Because what happens, I think, in this part of the world is that we don't really have genre publishing, but we certainly have all the imposed hierarchies of the various kinds of literature classifications coming in from the West, and this has been a constant struggle for people who are trying to do the kind of work that is not kind of expected for Indian writers to write. So, and since a lot of people who attend the JLF are people who want to become writers themselves, I thought this would be lovely for them to hear.
Sure. In that case, I do have one epilogue to my answer, if I may, which is Absolutely. Just I'm now old enough for writers in their early 30s to say, as I can't. I guess your own age. Samit, you look eternally young to me. But,
I'm in my early 40s.
Okay. I get writers even younger than you, and they come and say nice things to me at festivals, which is really nice. And they say, and I handed in this manuscript, and here's my new book. And my publisher said, well, I'm not quite sure. Like, what is it? And they said, well, look at Cloud Atlas. That's sold. And so the publisher says, yeah, okay. And when a writer says this to me, I mean, I'm grinning now just at the thought of it. It happened a ago. Just the idea that I'm really accidental. I'm not a revolutionary. I'm not this guerrilla of literature at all. But if inadvertently, accidentally, then one consequence of my career has been to legitimize and license younger writers' wackier experiments. Wonderful, wonderful. That's a gift to me as well. So I'd like to say that, and to future writers listening to this, stick to your guns, serve the book. And if a book is sending you into a melted genre kind of direction, then go with it, go with it. All that matters is the book any good or not? That's all that matters. You lose sight of that sometimes. Is this working or not? And it isn't as if you're making $100 million movie. It doesn't matter if you spend 2 months writing on something and then think, oh, you know what? This isn't really as great as I thought it would be. Like, that's great. If you've got that voice, like, that voice is your ally. That voice is your friend. You've put in more of the 10,000 hours that you proverbially need to do anything to become any good at it. It's not a wasted 2 months. All experiments, even perhaps especially the unsuccessful ones, make you a stronger writer. If you write something and you think it's good and your publisher isn't, then by all means you have my permission right here and now to say, there's this thing called Cloud Atlas, and that's just mad. It's madder than mine. So use it, and good luck. And if we meet at a festival one day, come and say hi.
That's absolutely fantastic, and I think it. I'm sure that who can be sure? But I really hope that this exact thing you just said is going to be quoted back at you one day by someone that you meet at the festival.
I look forward to it often.
So I had my 5 minutes left warning, I suspect, about 6 minutes ago. And also, I think that in terms of a really uplifting ending point, the what you just said is a wonderful closing to what personally, and for I'm sure everyone who hears this, will be an absolutely thrilling experience to hear you speak. So thank you once again. It was just an absolute pleasure talking to you.
It was a great pleasure for me. Also, thanks for all the work you did to prepare for this. I hardly let you get a word in edgeways, I'm afraid. That's just 4 or 5 questions, and I'm sure what was a much longer list, but I hope we get to meet in person one day. You take care, and thank you to everyone who's been watching this, and thank you to Jaipur Literature Festival for inviting me as well. It means a lot to me. Thank you. Thank you, Samit.
Thank you, David and Samit, for a wonderful conversation. The session is presented by The Week. And thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. Sessions are ongoing across all 3 of our venues: Front Lawn, Bank of Baroda Mughal Tent, and Darbar Hall. Stay tuned for the next session.